Okay, so the cut tab is the second tab here at the bottom of DaVinci. If we click that, this is what you're gonna see. Now in the top left, we have the media pool. This is the same media pool that we are working with in the media page, and the same media pool that you're gonna see throughout all the other tabs of DaVinci. Now we're able to navigate the media pool in the same way simply by using this file path over here. So if we wanna go back to the root folder, we can just click master over here, and it's gonna show us our main folder over here that holds all the other folders of the whole project. We can click into that, we can view all these other folders, and if we go into a specific folder, we can double click any one of these clips and preview it over here in the right in our viewer. Now, our viewer is used for both the source media over here in the media pool, as well as the timeline down here. So what we're seeing in the viewer just depends on what's selected. If we have a clip selected in our media pool over here, then that's what we're gonna be previewing in the viewer. If we have a timeline selected down here, then that's what's gonna be previewing in the viewer over here. Now, if we double click on one of these clips, we can see that we have a bit of a timeline down here underneath that clip. This is basically the timeline for the selected clip. And we have this playhead over here, which we can use to scrub around and view the entire clip over here. Now, to the right of our preview window, we can see that we have an audio meter here that tells us the audio level at any point of our clip. Now you can see that I set the audio meter to mute just because I don't want to hear the sound when I'm scrubbing through for now, especially because I'm filming this tutorial. Now to insert the clip that we're viewing in our preview window into our timeline, we can simply just take the clip like this and drag it into the top or bottom timeline. It doesn't matter what timeline you drag it in, the top one here or the bottom one, they're both pretty much the same thing. They're just different views of the same timeline. So if I take this playhead over here in the top timeline, we can see that the bottom one is also moving. That's because they're both the exact same timeline. They're just two different views of the same timeline. The top one here is the full length of the timeline, and it's always going to stay the full length. And the bottom one here is basically like a zoomed in section of wherever this playhead is up here. So I like to think of it as like a magnifying glass down here that kind of zooms in on whatever this playhead is on over here. Now, just like I was saying before, the reason the cut tab is so fast for making selects is because we have both of these views. We have the full timeline up here and then the zoomed in section down below. Now, if we wanted to bring just a section of a clip into our timeline down here, we can simply go back into our media pool over here. Let's select a new clip. And what we can do is mark in and out points on the little timeline up here. So obviously we don't want this entire clip. The beginning of it is kind of useless. I would say we probably only want like this part here for this example. So I'm going to hit 4 on my keyboard for the in point, or I. I is a standard for in point, but the Ravenclaw keyboard shortcut is 4 for in, and then we can choose 5 for out. You can see that we've marked these in and out points on our clip. Now, if I take this clip and drag it into my timeline over here, I'm just going to bring it to the end and let go. We've only brought in that one section of the clip and not the entire clip. Let's go back to that clip in the media pool. We've only brought in this section and not the entire clip here. Now, these in and out points, we can grab the little handles down here below and move them wherever we want. Now, we can see when I grab this handle down here below, we get kind of a zoomed in area of the audio waveforms for wherever the in point sits on the timeline. So this is great for marking very specific in and out points on our timeline based on the waveform. So let's say, this waveform here, something important is happening and I want to start it right before then. Because it zooms in when I'm dragging that handle, it's very easy to start it right before that audio plays right there, versus trying to do that when everything is scaled out like this. It's going to be much harder. It's really nice that it zooms in like that. We can also grab the handles on the left and right of this little timeline here to do the same things. So on the left here, we're able to move the in point just like that. We can click and scrub with the mouse left and right to find that exact point that we want to start at. So in this case, I'm not really going to need to look at the waveform. I'm just looking at the video. And then on the right, we have the ability to choose where the exact out point is. Now, the Ravenclaw keyboard shortcut to insert a clip from our media pool into our timeline is 6. So because we have our playhead right here, it's going to insert it in between these two. If I press 6, it's going to add it in just like that. So I'm just going to delete all my clips in my timeline here, and let's drag all these clips in so I can give you guys a better example of how you can navigate both of these timelines. So in the top timeline here, because we're zoomed out, I can very quickly go to any part of my timeline just like this. If I want to go to the end, I just click right here. If I want to go to the start, I can go here. Whereas in the edit tab, this is the more traditional way to view your timeline. You're going to have to zoom in and out a lot to get that close-up view of where your playhead is at. And then if you want to go back to the beginning, you're going to have to zoom out all the way, move your playhead back to the beginning, and then zoom in again. And that takes up a lot of time. So the cut tab is great because you no longer have to zoom in and out. You can instantly just go to any section of your timeline just like this very quickly. And the other cool thing about the way that the timelines work here is you can also just rearrange your clips very easily. So if there's a clip that you feel like you want to have earlier on in the timeline, you can simply just click on it, drag it, and wait for that little blue section to pop up, and it'll show you that little ghosted clip over there. And if you let go, then it's going to move that clip over to that new area. In the edit tab, if you wanted to move a clip over to a different part of your clip, you would first have to make a gap here. Now, it's not important that you understand how to do this right now. I'm just showing you guys how I would do it in the edit tab. You can press Y to select all the clips to the right of the playhead, and then you can take that clip that you want to move over there, drag it to its spot, delete the gap. That's kind of how you would rearrange clips over here. Now, in the cut tab, you guys saw how quick and easy that was. You can simply just click on a clip and drag it over to any section that you want, and very quickly and easily rearrange clips in here. So that's definitely a big advantage of the cut tab, and I find myself going between the edit tab and cut tab even later on in my edit, not just when I'm making selects, so that I can quickly rearrange things over here. Now, you can also drag clips from the bottom timeline to the top timeline, even though they are the exact same timeline. So if I have a clip over here that, might be a bit smaller and it's hard for me to click on it over there, I could just take it down here, move it to a different section, just like that. It's super easy and a super efficient way for us to rearrange our timeline. Now, one thing I want to note is that DaVinci also gives us the option to unlock this playhead down here below by simply pressing this button over here, free playhead, and that will allow us to move this bottom playhead left and right. Personally, I never use that. I find it very useful for that playhead to just sit in the center, and that just works for me. But if you ever want to be able to freely move that playhead down below, you can simply just press that button over there. Now in the top right, we have the inspector. If we click on it, we're able to view and change certain parameters of our selected clip in our timeline. So over here, the playhead is over top of this clip. So if I go to the top left of the inspector over here and click video, we have a bunch of different parameters that we can change of our clip. So at the top, we have the transform parameters. So we have things like zoom, the position, the rotation angle, the pitch, the yaw. We can also flip the image on each one of its axes, which is very handy. I'm super thankful that they give us the option to do this very quickly and not have to apply an effect in order to do that. That's really cool. And if we ever want to reset any of these, we can simply click the reset button to the right of the parameter. Or if we want to reset the whole section, we can click this little reset button at the top right of the section. And in here, we have a bunch of other parameters that we can change about our selected clip. The next one is Smart Reframe, which we're not going to talk about right now, but I do have a full video on this later on. Next up, we have cropping. To open that, we can just click on it, and then we have the option to crop the left side of the image, the right side, top, bottom. I'm gonna close that. We have something called dynamic zoom, which I'll be talking about in the next video, but this is a huge feature. I'm so thankful that DaVinci implemented this. It's a huge time saver. It makes the process of adding digital movement and zoom to your image much easier. So I'm just going to close that. Next up, we have composite, which basically gives us different options on how we want the opacity of our image to be affected, including an opacity slider down here. This is great for when you're applying things like lens flares or light leaks. You can set the composite mode to something like lighten or screen, and it's going to change the opacity of that asset to overlay it on top of everything else. Next up, we have the ability to change the speed of our clips. So we can do things like change the direction of our clip playback. So we can play it backwards. We can also freeze at a certain frame. We can change the speed here, change the frames per second down below. We also have the option to ripple the sequence. Now, it's not important for you guys to understand what any of this is. I'm just giving you kind of a top level overview of what you can do in the inspector over here. And personally, I like to make speed changes in the edit tab, but you do have the option to do those changes here in the cut tab as well. Below that, we have stabilization, which allows us to stabilize our clip and modify certain parameters of how it's being stabilized, which allows us to kind of fine tune the stabilization depending on what kind of clip we are using. Below that, we got lens correction, which is awesome. We can get DaVinci to analyze the clip for us and automatically correct the lens distortion, or we can do it manually down here below. I'm just going to reset that. And then below that, we have retime and scaling, which I'm going to dive into later on. But these are basically just different options on how we want DaVinci to process the retime and scaling changes that we've made to our clip. And next to the video tab, we have audio. If we click on that, we are able to adjust different parameters of our audio here. We could change things like volume, the pan. Pan is basically just how much of the audio is coming from the left speaker and the right speaker. This is a really great option for doing a bit more complex sound design. We can change the pitch. We have an equalizer here. This is all stuff that we're going to be learning about more in the Fairlight section of the course, but it is good to know that you are able to make those changes here in the cut tab as well. And all the way to the right here of the inspector, we have file, and this basically shows us the metadata of our selected clip. And it also gives us the option to input metadata for the clips and also add things like colors and things like this. This is something that I would do to make it easier to filter through all of my footage later on and find specific clips. Now, next to the inspector, we have the full screen button. If I click this, it's giving me a full screen display of my timeline. Now, personally, I don't really use that because then I don't have access to my timeline. What I like to do is go to Workspace, go to Video Clean Feed, and select my other monitor that I have over here to my left as my Video Clean Feed. So I have my entire workspace here on my main monitor, and I always have a full screen display of the viewer here to my left. Personally, I love this setup, and this is how I've been editing all of my videos recently. But obviously, if you're working on a MacBook and you only have one display, then you can't do this. So the full screen button right here is just a way for you to preview your preview window full screen. And next to that, we have quick export. This allows us to quickly export our timeline here. It just gives you a couple different codecs and formats that you can export at. Most of the time, I just stick to H.264. And down here, we can see that it has the same properties as what our timeline is set to. So 4K. We got 24 frames per second, and we can select export and it will give us a window. We can select where we want to save the file and it will export whatever we have here in the cut tab. I'm just going to click cancel because I don't need to do that. Now, the normal way that I would create a new timeline in the cut tab or even the edit tab is to press Command N, and then I get this create new timeline window over here. I can call the timeline whatever I want. I'll call it test. And over here, we have the option to ensure that it's using the project settings that we set at the beginning. If we uncheck this, we have the ability to go into format over here and we can change the properties of the new timeline that we are creating. But I'm just going to select use project settings because we set our project settings to exactly what we want. I'm going to click create, and we can see that it's created this new timeline over here in the main root folder of our media pool. In here, we can also see the timeline that we created previously. Now, remember, we didn't create that timeline by pressing Command N. We simply just dragged clips into the timeline, and then it automatically created a new timeline and called it timeline 1. Now, just remember, if you ever are creating a new timeline, it's going to bring that timeline back to the root folder by default. So what I like to do is create a new bin over here by pressing Command-Shift-N, or you can also right-click and select New Bin, and I'm going to call this Timelines. Then I'm going to drag all of my timelines into that one folder, and this is just a good way to stay organized. Now, whenever I want to, I can just go back to this timelines folder over here and access all of my different timelines just like that. So I'm just going to go back to the timeline that we originally created by double clicking on it right here, and we are back in that same timeline. One thing to keep in mind is if you ever feel like you're not really using the inspector panel or you don't want it to be here, you can just click on the inspector button and it will hide that whole section over there, giving you more room to play around with in your timeline over here and your preview window. Transitions, titles, and effects, which can be found up here. Let's start with the transitions. Now, if we scrub through here, we can see that we have tons of different options for transitions. And if we hover our mouse over top of any one of these transitions, it can give us a little bit of a preview in our preview window of what that transition will look like. So that's a really cool feature and allows us to very quickly get an idea of what this is going to look like. So we don't have to actually apply it to our clip first. We can get a preview of what it's going to look like first. Now, personally, do I use any of these? No. Would I? Maybe in some cases. Now, you can actually download tons of transitions, titles, and effects from the internet. For example, these ones down here are from Red Giant Universe. I personally haven't actually used them yet, but I have them if I ever need them. And if you ever want to download your own transitions, titles, and effects from the internet, you can, no problem, and preview them just like you can with the standard ones that come in DaVinci. Now, let's say we want to apply this arrow iris transition between two clips. Well, what I can do is click on it and drag it between the two clips that I want to apply it to. Now we can see that nothing's happening. We're not getting that little blue ghosting to drop this in. And if I let go, it's not going to do anything. Now, the reason that didn't work is because this first clip doesn't have any more frames past this point, and the second clip doesn't have any frames before this point. And that's because this is the hard end of the first clip and it's the hard start of the second clip. So what we're going to want to do is just trim it down a little bit to give it a little bit more room to play with. And we can see that, you know, we're not starting at the very start of this clip and we're not ending at the very end of that clip. And that gives DaVinci a bit of extra frames from each clip to create that transition. Now, if we grab that same arrow iris transition, drag it in between, we can see that we have this little effect that pops up. Now, if we let go, we can see that that transition was applied. So if we scrub over here, we can preview that transition. And we can also change the duration of the transition as well, just by clicking and dragging on it like that. Now, we can't go any further because we were running into the same issue as we were before. It doesn't actually have enough frames to prolong that transition. So what we can do is do the same thing as before. We can start the second clip a little bit later and finish the first clip a little bit earlier. That way now we can extend that transition even further. Wow, what a cool transition. Now that's pretty cheesy, not something I would actually ever do, but this is just an example of how you can apply this. And honestly, transitions like this could be pretty cool for, you know, YouTube videos and like review videos, stuff like that. It's pretty simple and it doesn't look too bad. Now, if you ever want to delete a transition, you can simply select it like that. You'll see that red outline and you can hit delete and it goes away just like that. If there's ever a transition in here that you find yourself going back to a lot, press this little star button next to it and it will be added to your favorites. And then whenever you want to apply a transition, you can simply go to your favorites folder here and quickly get access to all of your favorites just like that. So next to transitions, we have titles, same kind of a vibe. If we go into this titles section here, we have tons of different titles that we can preview simply by scrubbing our mouse over. We get an example in the preview window of what it's going to look like. If we find something that we like, we can simply select it and drag it over our timeline wherever we want. It doesn't matter if it's in the top timeline or the bottom one here. You can drag it wherever, let it go. And then we have that text ready for us to edit. We can select the text and go up here into the inspector in the top right. And here we are able to change the text to whatever we want. So we can call this skateboarding. And down below that, we have the ability to change all the other properties of the text, like the tracking, line spacing, all that fun stuff, even the color. And again, we can simply select that title down here, hit delete, and it's gone. And just like we can make our favorites for transitions, we can also make favorites over here as well, simply by clicking that star, and your favorites are going to show up in the favorites tab right here. So next up, we have effects. So these are all the effects that we can apply video and audio to the media in our timeline. So one effect that I find myself going back to all the time is lens blur, as well as directional blur. So I could favorite both of those, and whenever I'm in my favorites, those are going to pop up. If we ever want to apply an effect, we can simply just select it and drag it over the clip that we want to apply it to. And then when we check our inspector over here, we can see that this effects tab is now enabled. We can click into it and we can see the effect that we applied to the selected clip. So over here, we can see that we have lens blur applied to this clip, and it gives us a bunch of different properties down here that we can modify. So the blur size, the blade curvature, so that just affects how the blur kind of looks. It's like the aperture in the lens. But this stuff isn't really important for you guys to know right now. All you need to know is that when you apply an effect to any one of these clips, you'll be able to view that effect and modify its properties in the Effect tab under the Inspector. So just like in transitions and titles, we're able to hover our mouse over top of the effects to get a bit of a preview of what it's going to look like on our selected clip. So let's grab this invert color effect, drag it over our clip again, and we can see under that same effects tab, we have invert color as well. And we can turn it on and off simply by pressing this switch over here. And if we don't want it, we can simply just click on it and select delete over here. And now that invert color effect is gone. Now we can see that we have open effects here and fusion. So there's two different types of effects that you can apply onto your clips in the effects tab over here. So we got resolve effects, and then we also have fusion effects, which are going to be applied to your clip in a bit of a different way, and you'll be able to view them in this fusion tab over here. So let's grab this first one here, drag it over top of our clip. Now we can see that nothing was added to our effects tab over here, but this little fusion button is now enabled. If we click into that, we can see that this fusion effect is now inside of our inspector here, and we're able to modify the parameters just like before, except this is only in the fusion tab now. We could turn our effect on and off just like that, and then we can also delete it. Now, one thing I want to mention is that we are able to keyframe any of the properties for any of these effects right here, but that's not important for you guys to understand right now. We're going to be diving a lot more into keyframing later on. And personally, I don't do any keyframing in the cut tab. I do not think this is the place to be doing keyframing. You can do some pretty simple stuff, but the edit tab is where I do my keyframing because it gives you a lot more functionality.